Astra Exploration is a South American gold and silver exploration company with projects in Chile and Argentina. We've got CEO Brian Miller here to provide an overview of the company and to dig into the impressive recent results from its drill holes on the La Manchuria Project in Argentina, which gave over 35 grams per ton of gold and over 8,000 grams per ton of silver. It's Wednesday, June the 18th. I'm Martin Gagel with Market Radius Research. Please remember, this is neither recommendation nor investment advice. We're here to learn about the company. Brian, thank you very much for joining us. How are things going?
Thank you, Martin. Good to be here. It's a busy time, but it's a very good kind of busy.
Yeah, it looks like very good, busy. All right, thanks for joining us. You've got a lot of exciting projects to go over and exciting recent news. So why don't you take it away and walk us through the story?
Sure. Yeah, as you mentioned, the buzz right now is the recent drill results we just put out last week. Those were the initial holes from Argentina. I will touch briefly on the other projects in the portfolio because there's a lot of depth of value there. This story is 5 years in the making now. It's a relatively new company that I co-founded in 2020. And I think that we're at a watershed moment, as we announced last week, and exciting things going forward. Tagline here of continuing a legacy of gold and silver discovery. It's not just a slogan. I hope that you'll see that comes from the people who are involved at Astra and what they've done in their careers, the discoveries they've made, the value they've created for shareholders. It really is an impressive group of people with a fantastic past. Of course, the standard cautionary statement. And I'll just jump right into it. The people involved in this are the most important part of the equation. You have to have the right geology. You have to have the right rocks, of course, but it's the people that get you there. And it's the people that ultimately identify and reveal the value from that. And so this list of individuals right here, some of my co-founders, a lot of the people may be aware of some of these names here. For instance, Charles Funk, he's CEO of Heliostar, and he was VP Exploration at Vizsla Silver when the Napoleon prospect at Panuco was discovered. Heliostar, a recent story, a junior explorer that quickly transitioned into a junior producer. He's been cutting a pretty wide swath in the junior industry as of late. And Darcy Marood's another one. I've known Charles for, I think, close to 10 years now, and he was still with Newcrest. Darcy Marood, on the other hand, I did not know when I'd started this. He's signed on as a founding director, and he was actually introduced by Dave Caulfield, who is also on this slide. Dave was my mentor in the industry. Dave was critical as far as making some introductions that really shaped this team. But Darcy, his background, he was with Yamana for several years. He led one of the teams that discovered El Peñón in Chile. He discovered the Mercedes mine in Mexico. He helped build the Cerro mine in the Deseado Massif, which is an area we're going to be talking about today. So very relevant experience for the jurisdiction in which we're looking. Darcy worked previously, he and Roberto Alarcon listed here, they worked at Yamana. Roberto is based in Santiago. He's Chilean. He was in-house counsel at Yamana, and prior to that, Homestake. This is the guy who knows how to get stuff done in South America. He's got an exceptional business network and reputation and ability. He's been absolutely key at execution. Mahesh, our CFO, also CFO of Vizsla Silver, and prior to Heliostar becoming a producer, was CFO there. He's worked extensively in Chile and Argentina too. So, this team has the very relevant experience on all fronts for what we're doing and exploring in Chile and Argentina. And then, of course, Diego Guido, our head of exploration. He is based in Buenos Aires, Argentinian. He discovered the Pinguino deposit in Santa Cruz. He's a globally recognized epithermal expert, and he's particularly sought out for his knowledge on the Deseado Massif. He knows the region as well as many, and better than most. Just to start off here, this is a slide that I am probably most proud of. This is some of the hardest work that I have put into this company in the last 5 years. It's something that I think a lot of groups get wrong, but is perhaps one of, if not the most important thing as far as company structure. The people component doesn't stop with management and directors. It goes straight into the shareholders. And as you can see, some of our major shareholders Michael Gentili, he's our largest shareholder, owns about 16%. He's been a repeat investor since we became a public company. Peter Maroney was formerly at Yamana Gold, now Allied Gold. Mason Resources, the guys out of Toronto, this group, Simon Marcotte, Peter Demooney, Fahad El-Tamimi, Victor Cantori, and then some of the guys at Agentis Capital, Michael Gray, Scott Speed, that group. They were supporters of us as a private company, also very well versed in the Deseado Massif. That select group of individuals that I mentioned there, along with management and directors, we own collectively about 80% of the company. So it's very closely held, about a 20% public float. My philosophy is that that tight share structure serves shareholders best when markets are a bit lousy for juniors like they have been the past couple of years, but also when corporate activity is not such that generates interest in the retail space. So I've always been very cognizant about when to increase that public float. And I think that that's based on macro conditions as well as corporate activities. And I think that we're now entering a new stage of growth where we'll be looking to increase that public float. About 100 million shares outstanding, 115 fully diluted. This cash position right here was the May cash position. We just finished a drill program in Argentina. So the cash balance right now is going to be about closer to 2 million after we finish up paying all the bills from that. That does give us enough money in the treasury to fund an additional drill program of about equal size to what we just finished in Argentina. I'll be talking mostly today about the project in Argentina, although I will touch on briefly the projects in northern Chile. The Chilean projects right now are quite overshadowed because of the drill results in Argentina, but there's a lot of deep value potential there. They're terrific projects capable of adding a lot of value. We'll figure out what to do with those going forward, but they're definitely a big part of the story. When we're talking about Argentina, this is the Deseado Massif of the province Santa Cruz, southern Patagonia. It is one of the most prolific environments in the world for epithermal gold silver. Santa Cruz is historically one of the most mining-friendly jurisdictions in Argentina. There are several producing assets. There are past producing assets. There are world-class deposits like Cerro Negro, about 150 kilometers to the north of us. Cerro Vanguardia, about 100 kilometers to the southeast of us. And then, of course, I mentioned Cerro Morto, the one that Darcy helped build at Yamana, further yet to the east. The province leads Argentina in gold and silver production, accounting for about 60%. And there is a new political regime in place in Argentina, which has been quite favorable for business in general, but for mining in particular. The region is actually relatively young as far as an exploration region. And I just want to talk about some of the risk reward potential here, as we've seen in the last gold cycle that ended at about 2012. Some of the notable takeouts there, Yamana bought Extori for that Cerro Morto deposit for about $413 million. 2 years prior to that, kind of towards the peak of the cycle, Goldcorp bought Andean Resources for Cerro Negro, and that was at about $3.4 billion. There's been limited investment in Argentina over the past decade due to the political situation. The recent regime change we've seen under Milei, it's been the biggest, most drastic, and most positive change that we have seen in a generation. And so now we're seeing investment really start to accelerate back into Argentina. We're also seeing M&A activity increase in the industry, but of course, right now that's still at the major level. Going right to the property here, it's a good sized land package, 5,600 hectares, and a relatively square and contiguous block. The previous drilling here was all focused on a very small area, very central in the claim block. You can see it in this blue circle in the center of the map here, the eastern zone and the main zone. There's a very small resource that was drilled out here, and it was a shallow resource. The drilling was about 170 meters depth. There's a lot of opportunity at depth beyond that. There's open high-grade intercepts, but there's also a lot of regional exploration opportunity that really has never been looked at. And so there's a lot of opportunity just in the main and eastern zone. But the bigger story, I think the big blue sky picture, is the regional exploration opportunity that really hasn't even been looked at to date. The resource that was drilled here is a bulk tonnage resource. So it's got some pretty dense drilling on it. And some of the intercepts are absolutely spectacular. And the approach to this, it was never really focused on, I don't think, for the high grade potential. And that's where you can add the most value the most quickly, especially if you've got continuous mineralization shoots, which is what we are seeing here. We signed an agreement in July of last year. It's an option to earn up to 90% interest in the project, and that happens with a couple of phases. Won't go spend too much time on the details, but broadly speaking, we can earn 80% to begin with by spending $3 million US over a 4-year period. The work that we've done to date earns into years 1, 2, and part of the 3rd year. It's all money in the ground exploration, so no cash payments, no share payments. Once we earn 80%, we then have until the 6th anniversary of the agreement to purchase an additional 10% for a $5 million cash payment. So if we do have a tiger by the tail, we can get up to 90%. Our goal with this is to develop this asset into something that we can sell. So we've also built in a drag-along, tag-along provision such that if we sell our interest, the minority owner is obliged to sell theirs at a pro rata rate. It creates that pathway to 100% ownership.
Is there like an NSR or any royalties or anything on the project itself also?
Yes, good question. There is a 2.5% NSR on the project that is owned by Barrick. Quickly here, I'll try to stay out of the technical weeds as far as that goes, but there are some important factors that are worthy of understanding. You'll see that I've outlined in pink here, this is a volcanic unit. It's a lava flow that came from a volcano that's further west off the map. So that comes from the west moving to the east and actually conceals a lot of this deposit to the west, around to the north, and to the south. That's actually pretty shallow cover right there. So there's good opportunity to continue expanding the resource underneath those volcanics. There's also regional potential as shown by geophysics that looks like there's some good opportunity along strike to the southeast. And I'll talk more about that as we get into the details here. But an interesting background to the story, Diego was on this project, I think about 20 years ago as a junior geo. And so I have to tell this story because it very much is, well, number one, it's the truth, and it's kind of a Cinderella story. But we were drilling our project in Chile in 2022. We then had to get a permit for more drill platforms, which took 15 months. We had to do environmental impact assessment. So we lost momentum. The markets continued to deteriorate. And we had a choice at that point. We could either try to raise $4 or $5 million to try to continue drilling Chile and blow up our share structure, which arguably at the time I think was one of the most valuable things of the company, or we could tuck our horns in and go hunting. The markets were dismal. We had several opportunities that we'd looked at, so we decided to go look for an asset. And I told Diego when I gave him the mandate, I said, find me something with high grade, multi-million ounce potential anchored by an existing resource. And he laughed at me. He says, you want a unicorn? I said, yes, I do. Go find it. And he says, well, we're focused on Chile. Can I look at Argentina? I said, yes, depending on the province. He said, Santa Cruz? I said, yeah, I'd look in Santa Cruz. And mind you, this is all happening. This is a 3-minute conversation with Diego. And he says right away, he says, I know which project I want. It's called La Manchuria. It's owned by Patagonia Gold. I was on it 20 years ago. It is one of the most exceptional properties I know of in the Deseado Massif. He said, that is the best acquisition target for us. He says, but good luck getting it because Patagonia historically, they have a massive portfolio in the Deseado Massif. And so we engaged with Patagonia. It was a 13-month process getting the deal done, but 13 months later, we emerged with a deal on La Manchuria that I think is going to create a lot of value for both parties. And during that time of getting that deal done, it was 13 months in the making. The management team all supported me in the suggestion that since we own so much stock and we have so much invested in the company, that the best thing we can do is keep the share structure tight. So we raised just enough money to keep the lights on, keep the fees paid for the claims, and we all went without pay for 12 months. And it wasn't deferred pay. We all worked for free for 12 months because our big payday is the equity in this thing. So we emerged from that with a great deal on a fantastic project. And we financed that in November with Michael Gentili and his group and management. We all came in and put the money in for that. All of that paper that we did that financing with was locked up for 12 months. So it doesn't come free trading until November this year. Or the warrants, we did a half warrant with that is held by the same group. None of that paper is free trading until November. So we kept the share structure very tight, very closely held. I'm very thrilled with where we're at now. And then, of course, we had a couple of things that lined up that we really couldn't control that lined up in our favor as well. Precious metals prices, the political situation in Argentina. So we're getting a lot of tailwind from a few different directions here. But quickly here, this was a cross section from kind of the north area of, the south area of the main zone here. Just shows kind of what grades they were still drilling. This is a narrow vein system, but the density of veins is spectacular, as are the grades. And you can see here, this was 160 meters depth below surface, and they were still making intersections of over a meter at 118 grams per ton gold. So very impressive grades. The fertility of the system is absolutely not in question. There's 4 previous drill results that were drilled prior to our involvement here, some of the 4 best results. And you can see some of these spectacular grades that I'm talking about. And they even line up sometimes these parallel systems over some very good mining widths, 20 meters at 10 gram gold plus 800 grams silver, 1.6 meters at 257 grams per ton gold. There's not a decimal point missing. That's 257 grams per ton gold and over 4 kilos of silver, 4 meters at 26 gram gold and over 3 kilos of silver, 2 meters at 52 grams per ton gold and over 3 kilos of silver. And all of this is in shallow drill intercepts, less than 200 meters from surface. And then, of course, the table below shows a number of other high-grade intercepts as well. But as Diego and the team continued, or I guess began working through the data and relogging several thousands of meters of core, he started seeing opportunity for this thing to be open in several dimensions, not just at depth. As these arrows indicate here on the map, we see opportunity for this thing to have parallel structures that are open to the southwest. The eastern zone, which has seen far less exploration, it is open along strike and at depth. There's only 8 holes in the eastern zone out of the total 133 that have been drilled on this. And there was a high-grade hit in one of those, but it's open in both directions. The main zone, I think, was previously determined to have likely terminated along strike in both directions. And we believe that there was opportunity to open this along strike. And the drill results that we just published here last week confirm that. So this is a super exciting time for the company. That white interval that I mentioned, that occurred at the very southeast edge of the known vein extension. And an important part of this, Diego recognized early. This is just a simple cross section looking. So for the viewers that might not understand the cross section, think about this as you're standing and looking at the end of a loaf of bread, and you cut part of that bread off. Now you're seeing the crust and the white. Like this is looking at the end of the bread, you're seeing the white. So it's this black line here up in the inset map. One of the things Diego identified early was that there's this yellow unit here that's right at the ground level, and it's a post-mineral breccia, which was previously interpreted to be a host rock. So the thought was that there should be veins in that rock, when in fact that unit occurred after the veins were in place, so you're not going to find veins in that. Importantly, if you move from the north end of this to the south, you see that unit gets thicker. And so they drilled several holes in this previously, and they didn't find veins. And so the conclusion was the system terminated to the southeast and was likely faulted off because there are some cross-cutting faults there. When in fact, we know that the veins are underneath that cover, and we believed that they continued on to the southeast. And I'll show you the confirmation of that here in a couple of slides. But the eastern zone, as I mentioned, had seen far less exploration. One of those holes drilled 4 meters at 16 gram gold, and that occurred 53 meters downhole. There was never any follow-up drilling underneath that or along strike. That was still remaining wide open. So we did put a hole underneath that with this first drill program. The next photo that I'm going to show you here would be from the perspective as if you were standing at the right end of this purple arrow and looking to the northwest. So you're going to be looking northwest and uphill. And what you see is outcropping at surface, you have a 1 meter thick vein, and you can walk that vein up the hillside. You can trace it all the way up the hill and actually see where it develops into these thin veinlets uphill. So one of the thoughts that we had was, does this thing have the ability for these thin veinlets at surface to develop into thicker, competent veins at depth? And we've got visual confirmation of that on the surface. You can actually see where those veinlets that are either 1 centimeter up to 10 centimeters develop into a thicker vein in about 100 to 150 meter elevation change. So we've got that confirmation with this on surface. And we're actually seeing some of that now in some of the drill results we just recently put out. But to talk quickly about the target areas for this first drill program, it was about 2,500 meters of diamond drilling, and we drilled 11 holes. 4 target zones are all circled or labeled here in yellow. Target area 1 to the southeast, and this green kind of translucent green shaded area, this is the area of that post-mineral breccia, that cover. And Diego's model has this thing plunging to the southeast. So it's kind of tipped up on the northwest side and plunging to the southeast. So the veins get deeper as you go to the southeast. So target area 1, this was to test for extension of these main structures beyond previous drilling. And you can actually see in here these little rectangular formations on the map. Those were drill pads that were previously built because they were doing step-out drilling to the southeast. But they were actually, a lot of them were never used because they drilled into that post-mineral unit. There was no veins. The conclusion was that it was faulted off. But as we mentioned in the news release, in each one of these holes, we intersected veins, veinlets, or faults in every single one of the holes. So the structures that have historically been mineralized, we intersected in every single hole. So we knew in the field before we even got assays back that Diego's model had high credibility and it was working. Notably, 107 and 106, 110 were some of the more important holes. We did space 106 and 115 out quite a ways because we weren't sure how much offset there was to the southeast. But the headliner hole from the last news release was 108. Areas 2 and 3 that I mentioned here had kind of 2 functions. And one was to test for parallel structures, step out and test for additional parallel structures laterally, but also test for extension at depth of the known feeder zones. So like the eastern feeder zone also intersected with hole 108. But fantastic grades from hole 108. This was at 124 meters downhole, so about 100 meters below surface. 4.4 meters of almost 12 grams per ton gold and almost 2,800 grams of silver. This is open at depth, open along strike. So this was a fantastic first hit. Hole 105 was another really interesting hole. This was a big step out, 150 meters to the southwest. This intersected 3 veinlets, or 3 veins near surface, starting at about 6 meters. One of the more important intercepts, 2 meters at 6.8 grams per ton gold and almost 490 grams per ton silver. This starts at a very shallow depth. This is open and along strike. And one thing that I find really interesting about this is if you look at hole 108, as Diego's named now the Argentine vein, this was actually intersected previously within about 10 meters of surface. And I think that drill result was 2 meters at 2 gram gold and 300 grams silver, and developing into these huge grades and wider width, about 100 meters beneath that vertically. And so the thought is that, can there be something like that at 105? This is a brand new series of veins here and a big step out from previous drilling. So that's a really interesting drill intercept. Hole 106, we didn't have any significant values. There was vein structures in there, but no grade, so to speak. 107, we did choose to publish with that first news release. That is pending an over-limit assay, QA/QC. And what that means is that when we got the initial assays back, all this said was that there was an excess of grade, so we had to send back for more analysis. We opted to disclose that in the news release because we didn't want to be releasing holes out of sequence. That always raises questions of, why they haven't released this hole. So on the note of disclosure and transparency, we opted to disclose that with the news release. So once we get those assays out, we'll put those out. Hole 109, 4 meters at 3.7 grams per ton gold and 81 grams silver. One thing about what we're seeing here to the east, we're seeing a lot of opportunity for continuity, or a lot of potential for continuity between the main zone and the eastern zone. So there's a fair bit of room in between there. And the important thing is with some of these grades like I'm talking about, you can start adding ounces very, very quickly if you have continuity of these kinds of grades. So this is a really exciting point in time for the company. And, all I can say is that, Diego doing what he could with limited meters and limited budget. I can't really think of a way in which he could have cracked this thing wider open in multiple dimensions with a limited budget. I think he did an exceptional job. I'd just like to mention that to everybody involved. And so the question then is, what are the next steps? For several months, we've been putting this in front of several people, and we've got a lot of attention on it. A lot of people find it very interesting. But to be perfectly honest, the reconstruction of the model from ground zero, as Diego did it, it was quite conceptual. And so there's a lot of people that wanted to see drill results first. And I think Diego done knocked it out of the park with that. So we've got some really good attention. We've got some very good feedback on this. We're really excited about where we're at. Now, we still have 7 holes to put out. We've put out 4. We've still got 7 holes that we're expecting to have out by the end of this month. We currently have enough money to fund another round of drilling of about the same size that we just got done with, and it funds the company into 2026. We are currently making provisions for an expanded drill program. We're expecting to recommence and call it 2 or 3 months. The weather right now, it's winter months down there. You can drill year round down there, but it gets a little more expensive and less production a couple months out of the year. And plus, I think it's well worth it to let Diego work through the data, refine the model, and really be prepared for an upcoming drill program. So we are literally just starting to market this. As I mentioned, we went through a full year with paying the absolute minimum, so we haven't done any marketing. We're just starting to get this story out. It's been very well received. We're getting a lot of uptake with this. So I think that we're going to have some really strong support from a number of different angles, and we're really putting the company in the position for a catalyst-filled 2025 and into 2026. So that pretty much covers Argentina. I'll take a pause there for a moment because, like I said, that is the main focus right now. There are 2 more projects in the portfolio in Chile that do have a lot of value depth to them.
Well, Brian, why don't you quickly go over your Chilean assets, and then we can circle back. We've got some questions from the audience, and we can circle back and hit the Argentinian and wherever else the questions lead us.
So yeah, northern Chile, shifting gears a little bit, northeast of Antofagasta. This is mining country. So some of the biggest copper deposits in the world were right next door to Spence and Sierra Gorda. This is the original property that we acquired when we started the company. And this is a terrific project. We really like this project a lot, and it's got a lot of potential. We think the big story here is still the epithermal system. This was previously explored for copper, and an epithermal system discovered when they were exploring for copper. The entire area is covered by gravels and caliche, so nothing daylights. You don't see any vein outcrop at surface. But it's about 15 kilometers from Spence and Sierra Gorda copper mines, which are 2 massive copper mines by any standard. You'll see that there's some regional fault structures here. These have been associated with these large porphyry deposits. The Dominador fault does run right through the northeast section of the claims. There is a good-looking copper target up there. So there's a lot of value potential here. It's got great infrastructure, road access, etc. But we were one of the first ones, we were the first ones to do some systematic exploration for epithermal here. We've got gold and silver grade across the entire district. We did magnetics that showed several kilometers of potential veins, and these veins are very thick. So I'm talking about Argentina, some of the thickest structures we see there are 2 meters, and in here some of the thickest structures we see are 30 to 40 meters. They're about 10 to 15 meters true thickness on average. So very, very large veins, very big, powerful system. We defined over 2 kilometers of vein strike. As I mentioned, that we were doing some drilling in 2022, 3 areas of high grade gold within 250 meters of surface. It's never been explored beyond that. Several of those are still open. We do make some comparisons with El Peñon. As I mentioned, we've had obviously some intimate experience with that. Both low to intermediate sulphidation systems hosted in Paleocene rocks, thick veins developing at depth. And I'll talk about this just briefly here because they are important, but these systems can be massive. And when I talk about massive, I think total known endowment of El Peñon is somewhere around 9 million ounces of gold and 230 million plus or minus ounces of silver. And despite its massive size, there was nothing to see at surface. There was no outcrop. But this thing has had some incredible legs over several decades of production and exploration, and still going. And so these are the kind of opportunities that we see that are concealed under this gravel and caliche. I did mention that there's a copper target here. It's in the northeast section. It had some exploration done previously. It's again blind. There's nothing that really outcrops. But the pictures that you see here, some tourmaline breccia from the Dominador claims, and compared to some of the mineralized ores that they're processing at Sierra Gorda. There's, like I said, previous exploration. It's difficult to do IP and geophysics here. And so they did, previously they drilled 6 holes along here. They oriented them together, trying to cut that tourmaline breccia at depth. They then used those drill holes to put the conductors down, which gave them this chargeability anomaly just to the east of where they drilled. They didn't quite trust if that was a good survey or not. So they did one line of pole-dipole IP by hole 26. And this is this lower section that you see here, created this big chargeability target that hole 26 just clipped the outer edge of. So there's a great looking copper target here. And as I talk about deep value, if there's, what's a potential copper discovery worth that's situated 15 kilometers from 2 major operating copper mines? There's a lot of deep value potential in the portfolio. The third project is in the Maricunga, an exceptional region of endowment, but very high elevation, water challenges, short exploration season, much more expensive. Geologically, like for instance, Diego and Charles have loved this project since we picked it up. It's a good high sulphidation epithermal target. The analog is a Solaris Norte type target, which is further to the north. I think this one is a terrific JV candidate, and we've had some interest expressed in this one. So we'll figure out what to do with the Chilean assets now that our focus is obviously going to be shifting to Argentina. But this is a terrific time with the company. Like I said, 5 years in the making. It's kind of like bankruptcy, just at the opposite end of the spectrum, happened slowly, then suddenly. And I think that this is absolutely an inflection moment for the company this year.
With the Chilean assets, you said you obviously your focus is in Argentina right now. Do you think to, let's say, maximize value out of those, you would maybe need to put a little more exploration work into it to, let's say, de-risk it a little bit to make it a little sexier? Or are they maybe at the stage right now where they could get joint ventured, or you could sort of realize some partnership value out of it?
I think that there is work that we can do prior to drilling both of those that I think has the potential to add quite a bit of value and ultimately attract a partner, whether that's a JV or divestment or spin out, whatever you want to, whatever the case may be. There's always the question of, do you spread yourself too thin? You become distracted. How much can you really handle and do justice? And so that's always a question. And I have to say that every single decision that we make, at the forefront of that is, what does this decision do for dilution? Like, does it prevent dilution of the company? And how much value does it add? So those are always the key criteria that we consider. And that will be at the forefront of any decision that we do with that. But I think that there's several potential ways that we could address that to do good things for the company.
Going back to La Manchuria here, just the project you mentioned in Chile, one of the projects there is very high altitude. What's the altitude? And you're drilling in the wintertime now. You said that's a little harder. Can you just the overall geography of where you are? What does that look like?
Yeah, the altitude at La Manchuria, I think, is about 650 meters elevation, so it's not very high.
Yeah.
You can drill year round there. As I mentioned, you can drill right now. There's just about 2 months out of the season where the weather's pretty adverse and productivity drops, and it gets on a cost per meter basis, it gets more expensive. But certainly if, you can plan around that and you can decide to drill right through the nasty season, or you can take a pause, as conditions dictate. The access and infrastructure in the area is fantastic. You fly into Buenos Aires, and then you take another flight to a regional airport called El Calafate, and then you've got about a 4-hour drive on the road to the project. It's a provincially maintained gravel road, drives right to the property. It's remote enough that you don't have the urban interface issues, but it's not so remote as to be, prohibitive as far as access.
Could you dig a little bit more into the history of the project? Is this your first drill program on it? And then the Patagonia group that had it beforehand, like, and you said there was a resource estimate. I'm guessing that like an initial resource estimate, you don't want to be constrained by what they were talking about there in numbers. You've got so much more growth opportunities there. But just give us a little bit of history of how many meters they put in and what's happened to the project until you got your feet in it.
Yeah, the resource, it was done in 2019 with a gold price of $1,300 and a silver price of $18. And it is a total of 146,000 ounces gold equivalent. And the resource was drilled out. It's very shallow, like I said, within 200 meters of surface, most of it less than that. And it was drilled out as a bulk tonnage resource. So it's got a high density of drilling on it. There's about 22,000 meters total of drilling, most of which was diamond drilling. And then, of course, that was prior to our involvement. But there's a lot of data that came with that. And it's, like I said, it's sat dormant. I think the last drilling on it was in 2013. So it really hasn't had anything done for, a better part of 12 years.
Okay. All right. And is this the first? Go ahead.
No, I was going to mention one thing that is very noteworthy is that the 11 holes that we drilled were all legitimate step outs. So there was no infill drilling or twinning, where we knew there was mineralization. The minimum step out was 50 meters and the maximum was 100 on structures. And of course, then I said we had that hole 105 that stepped out 150 meters roughly to the southwest. So everything that we found there was all expansionary toward, in addition to what's already there.
Yeah. And are there any other just brand new zones that I don't know if they'd be considered a new discovery, but like more than just a step out, but a new area of interest?
Yeah, absolutely. And is it all right if I just bump back here to the?
Yeah, no, please do. That's keep the
That's a great question because the focus, like I said, historically has been on this resource, which is, here zoomed way out, you have the main zone and the east zone. You've got several kilometers in any direction for expansion. We know that there's high-grade geochem anomalies regionally that have never been looked at or addressed. So this is really kind of the blue sky. If there's, and I'm saying depending on what there is total on the main zone and eastern zone with continuity potential between the two of them, what's the ultimate potential there? But then what do you have regionally? You've got several targets that have never been looked at. This has been the sole focus. And even to the southeast, we see in a lot of the geophysics, we see targets that are coincident with magnetics, with CSMT. So there's some geophysics that go along with it that are quite compelling and add some real appeal to this beyond this small focus zone in the center.
You mentioned you're reassaying one of your drill holes there. Could you clarify the rationale for that and sort of what the assay technology, what didn't work the first time?
Yeah, and it's call it a reassay. I don't know if that's the correct term, but ultimately what you do, you get the information back, you get the assay results, and you've got the samples listed. And this one came back with over limit. So it was a certain threshold, but the grade was higher than that. And so you had to request additional analysis on it to get that ultimate grade. And so
on the first pass assay, it went above that's pretty exciting, right? Like it's not like it was so low that you couldn't measure it. It was too high that they kind of ran out of the,
right.
It doesn't go up to 11.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting too. I think that there's different thresholds for gold and silver. So yeah, it's ultimately that's a good thing to have, right? So we've got and particularly because it's hole 107, which is the extension of that structure that was a key target to the southeast. So yeah, and again, I mentioned that we opted to disclose that. There was a lot of internal discussion on that because we didn't have a final assay. And you want to avoid too much speculation. I'm very much in the camp of trying to underpromise and overdeliver. I think that if you start releasing holes out of sequence, especially if it's just one hole on a key target, then people start, And it's junior mining, so a lot of times it's
Yeah.
people think the worst. So
Yeah.
it was a matter of disclosure and transparency.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense and lets people yeah, contemplate what that could mean going forward. All right. We have some questions here from the audience that I will get to now. I think you've addressed this. But to address the question, when do you anticipate the remaining drill results?
We expect to be putting the remainder of the drill holes out by the end of June.
Okay, so we've got, yeah, less than 2 weeks to go here. We're going to get some. Will it be, do you think it'll be out in one batch, or could that maybe be made up out of 2 news releases?
I believe those will probably be put out in one batch.
Okay. All right. Could you consider this to be a new discovery? And what is the end game? Would you partner to take it to first pour?
Well, first of all, I'd have to acknowledge the work that Patagonia has done. Like they made the discovery. It was made, and we saw that obviously there was some spectacular drill results. It came down to a different interpretation that I think really opens this thing up in multiple dimensions. So yes, you could say that we're looking at this through the lens of much bigger scale potential, and I think that is a discovery in and of itself. But I have to give credit to where credit is due, and ultimately that discovery was made prior to our involvement. As I mentioned, Diego's work. A lot of people looked at that and they thought it was a fabulous interpretation, but they wanted to see some drill results, and so he gave it to them. As far as the timeline and potential for, ultimately first pour, I can't look anyone in the straight eye and say anything that I think is honest, because it is too early to tell. That depends on several factors. That could depend on what kind of grades we find, what kind of continuity we find, how big this thing gets. Are we going to continue to focus on, really showing the scalability of this prior to putting out an initial resource? There's too many variables involved, and there's also the market conditions. So I couldn't look anyone in the eye with a straight face and say that I have a good idea of what that's going to be.
May we see these multiple veins opening up as we go deeper? Could there be several very significant veins that don't come to surface?
I think that's possible. I really don't know. I think, and again, I'm not technical by background. I know enough to be dangerous, so I don't want to start wading into questions that are above my pay grade. But one thing I think is noteworthy. It's hard to overstate the number and density of veins that you see here, and even at surface, the area is absolutely blitzed with veins and grade in just about everything. In fact, when we were on the project at the end of March, Diego picked up a piece of veinlet at surface that actually had visible gold in it. And there's not too many places that you can walk around and find stuff like that. So given that the focus previously has been very near surface, and we've already demonstrated that there's lateral potential and there's potential at depth and along strike, yeah, anything's possible here, and the grades speak for themselves.
How deep were your holes to date now? How far are you drilling down?
I think the deepest holes, and this would need to be confirmed. I think some of the deepest holes were around 220 to 230 meters vertical depth. So that's going to be a total drill hole length of, call it 330 or 340 meters, something like that. But I think that it's a good ballpark.
Could you imagine in future drill programs going deeper than that to seeing how far down the system goes, or you're going to just go more laterally out?
The next steps will obviously focus on areas that we think are going to add the most value the most quickly. But yes, without a doubt, I think that especially if we see that southeast strike open up, and if indeed the system is plunging like Diego believes it is, if we continue to find indication of that, yeah, we'll keep, as long as we get good widths and extremely high grades, we'll keep going after it. Because I think ultimately what this is most likely to start out as an open pit and transition into underground is what this looks like the scenario would be.
With these exceptional grades in Argentina, what size footprint would you need to get to 1 million ounces?
Again, something that it's hard to put a pin in that. one of the rules of thumb, like Darcy would talk to me about, he says, and I'm going to do my best not to misquote Darcy here, but kind of a rule of thumb is that a structure that is 2 meters wide, 1,000 meters long, and 200 meters in vertical extent is roughly 1 million tons of ore. So if you have 32 grams average grade, then that's, 1 million ounces in that structure. To give a bit of context, the headliner hole that we drilled, if you've got 35 grams of gold and 82 or 8,300 grams of silver, using that same logic, if that width was continuous, if you had a structure that was 1.4 meters wide and you had 200 meters in vertical extent, you would only need a structure 375 meters in length to have 1 million ounces of gold equivalent. Now, I say gold equivalent, that's a gross metal value. We do believe this is a gold dominant project. It's about 70% gold and 30% silver, but that one hole was just the opposite. It was 70% silver and 30% gold on a gross metal basis. So back to the question, I really don't know how many meters it would take. That all depends on what kind of grade, thickness, and continuity you have there, but we can see scenarios where you would add a bunch of ounces in very short order.
Well, firstly, kudos on your on-the-fly math work there. That's very
I hope I didn't misstate it. I think that's accurate.
I'll take your word for it.
And if it's not, I'll own it.
Yes. Yeah. With the warrants that are outstanding, how much money would that bring into the company?
There's about 4.8 million warrants at 10 cent that expire in November of this year. So that's about $480,000. And then I think it's 1.5 million warrants at 18 cents that expire in April of next year. We are starting to see some of those April warrants exercise as well, but expecting all of those to come in, that would put in about, call it 750,000, somewhere in that ballpark.
And essentially 80% of the shares are in friendly hands, call it. Do I remember that correctly from the beginning of your deck? Would that be about the same for those warrants, or maybe even a higher percentage given the inside?
Yeah, no, that would be a higher percentage than 80%. That's 100% in friendly hands.
Yeah. Okay. So they would
yeah. Okay. And I don't remember if I mentioned this or not, but it's the shares for that financing that we did in November with those warrants. All of those shares from the placement and the warrants are all locked up until November of this year. And those are all in very tight hands.
Can you speak to the infrastructure in place in and near La Manchuria and the nearby producing mines that could be interested?
Yeah, the infrastructure, as I mentioned, it's road access, provincially maintained gravel roads, goes right to the property. There's water nearby. There's power nearby. There's actually several old abandoned estancias nearby. They're old farm stays that have power. So there's the access and infrastructure is good. I can't remember. Was there another part of the question?
Yeah, the infrastructure and then other producing mines or any
okay.
Yeah.
One of the things I really like about this project is, our target here ultimately is hopefully something that's the million ounce or multi-million ounce potential that would, attract a major producer. One of the other things that I think is really attractive about this is that you have the nearby Capoeste mine, which is also owned by our partners Patagonia, just to the northwest. They're producing oxide ore there. And I think that's approaching the end of its life. I'm not sure how much is there just as far as the oxide, but there's still a pretty impressive sulfide resource there. So there's, a nearby operating facility there. There's also the Martha mine, which has been on care and maintenance just to the southeast. And then also Manantial Espejo, which is just to the southeast a little bit further. So all within about 50 kilometers, you have some facilities there, all of which are going to need ore at some point. So that opens the door for the potential for a toll milling operation, further fast tracking production and lowering startup costs. So one of the, I think a company that would view this as attractive is a junior or mid-tier producer, because it's got that organic growth potential to it. And that's something that would be really attractive for a company that of that size that, this could really move the needle for.
Can we expect some regional exploration at La Manchuria later this year?
Yes, I would say emphatically yes. We're absolutely interested in getting out on the ground and doing some of that more regional exploration and addressing some of the potential of these regional targets.
And that wouldn't be necessarily drilling, that'd be more surface work, geophysics, et
Yeah,
cetera, that sort of a thing.
mapping, sampling, that kind of stuff. Absolutely, maybe trenching.
Can you speak to the permitting process to drill in Argentina and your local knowledge and connections that could help you with that?
I would have to say that the government organizations in Argentina have absolutely been focused on fast tracking the permitting process, been very aggressive about trying to expedite that. When we applied for a drill permit, there's several studies that you have to do. There's the hydrology and there's the archaeological, and there's several things that go along with that. And we submitted our permit application in November of last year. We got a reply by December. And then there's about 2 months in Argentina during that time. There's pretty much a complete holiday. So, December, January for the most part is complete holiday. But we ended up getting our drill permit by the first part of March. And typically you tend to see that take about a 6-month process. So I think that they are absolutely aggressively fast tracking things as much as they can. We got that done in be 4 or 5 months roughly, with a 2-month holiday in the middle of it. So I would call that exceptionally fast. There's places that are viewed as tier 1 jurisdictions that aren't that fast. This next phase of drilling, we have that permit in place. Permitting wise, we can continue drilling there. The only thing that we really need to update afterward is the water permit, which takes about 3 to 4 weeks.
With the NSR and the last 10% from Patagonia, are there any contractual purchase out or buyback agreements for those?
There's not, and that's a good point. Barrick owns a 2.5% royalty. Patagonia's interest, it's again, there's details to that, but there's certain cases where dilution, whether their interest transitions from a carried interest to a participating interest, and then standard dilution. If they dilute below 10%, it converts to a 1% NSR, and there's no buyout provisions on any of those.
All right. And do they have to participate pro rata after a certain point to maintain that 10%?
Yeah, the way it works is that once we earn 80%, their 20 is carried until we produce 43-101 resource of 1 million or more gold equivalent ounces in the indicated plus inferred categories. Once we do that, their participation becomes or their interest becomes participating, and then standard dilution from that point.
All right. And how close is the closest mill? You said everything was within, what, 50 kilometers of you?
Yeah, I think the closest one is Martha, and I don't recall the exact distance. I want to say 35 to 40 kilometers, maybe. It may be a little closer than that, but they're pretty close.
Okay. I'm just looking at the regional map you have here, and you've got the blue box over it. That yellow dotted circle, I'm seeing a scale to the lower right there of 1 kilometer. Would that be, what, 3-4 kilometers across there, roughly, in that sort of regional shot? Or I'm just trying to get some perspective on that.
I think east to west, it's close to 5, if I recall.
Okay. Okay. So, but that sort of scale. All right. Okay. We've covered a lot of territory. We're almost at an hour here. I guess what I always like to do is just review upcoming news. The next 2 weeks or so until for June are going to be, we're all waiting, holding our breath for the next drill results to come out. After that, you're taking a bit of a pause where you sort of interpret all the data, come up with your drill plan that you would then start in, what, 3 or 4 months? You were saying you're going to take a sort of a rest and planning break, and then you'd announce obviously your general drill plans ahead of that. Do I have that right? And are there any other sort of catalysts or milestones that investors should be keeping their eyes open for?
Yeah, I'd call it 3 months from now when we start drilling, plus or minus. The catalyst event, obviously the remainder of the holes this month, commencing drilling, and as I said, we're planning for another program of 2,500 meters, but we're also already making provisions to expand that. So, and we'll obviously have to put more capital in this to do that. But like I said, we're getting some really solid support and interest right now from groups who've had their eyes on this for several months. So I would think that if the market's there, we can expect to get much more aggressive with the drill bit.
With that, let's wrap it up here. Any final thoughts or comments to leave participants and viewers here with?
Only just a huge thank you to everybody who's been supportive along the way and believed in the story when nobody else did, believed in the people when nobody else did. It's been an absolute brutal 2 years. But that's, in my opinion, and it's been for a long time, that's when the money's made. And that's, hats off to the team at Astra and the shareholders and supporters. It's Cinderella story at this point. We're quite happy.
All right, Brian, thank you very much. Great story, a great presentation. Glad that you were able to make it here, and I'm looking forward to following the news and hopefully getting you back for some updates as things progress. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you, Martin. Appreciate it.